Welcome on in to the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Joining me on this one to help preview this weekend's matchup against the TCU Horned Frogs, Melissa Triebwasser of Dave
Nailed
Campbell's
it.
Football Insider Frog Podcast. Excited to have you, Melissa. Thanks
Hey,
for joining us.
yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And it's great to be here to talk about this game that certainly won't make me very sad.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I've learned that you are very dedicated to your craft.
Thank you.
I understand that you took a trip to Europe last weekend and stayed up for a 1 a.m. kickoff of or 2 weeks ago, and stayed up for a 1 a.m. kickoff of TCU in Houston.
Well,
Just that's dedication.
I want to be factually accurate. I didn't stay up for that broadcast. I actually woke up because I did definitely go to bed at like 9:30. So I woke back up in order to be able to listen to that game, watch that game. I purchased the VPN so that I could access it. And for all of my trouble, I got one of the most disappointing TCU losses that I've experienced in my 20-something years of being associated with the university. So that was cool. That was great.
Man, that's tough.
Yeah.
That is certainly tough. So shout out to you for staying committed to it.
Yeah.
All right. So
the things we love the most hurt us the most deep. It's fine.
oh, so true. Oh man, that's so true. All right, let's dive into this, and let's talk about this Horned Frogs teams. Obviously, this team was coming into the season was expected to be fairly competitive. They were picked in the middle of the Big 12 conference, and I think there were some expectations that Sonny Dykes and TCU were going to turn things around after a fairly disappointing 2023 season, coming off of the national championship game run and all of that sort of stuff. So what's been the big issue for the Horned Frogs this season?
I mean, you say that in a way that you expect me to answer with one thing, and I don't know that is possible. Have you also learned that I tend to be a little bit of a nihilist and pretty honest when it comes to my football program this year?
Yeah.
Also, my earpods are not working, so we're just going to not deal with that. But I do think that there are several issues. But what it starts with is the offense hasn't been efficient. Turnovers have been a big issue in that regard, and then the defense, as bad as it was last year, I don't know that we necessarily expected there to be a massive leap forward, but at least to see some progress with Andy Avalos getting the nod at defensive coordinator and the success that he's had at so many other places. And it just hasn't happened. And I don't necessarily know that it's all his fault because his defense is so predicated on kind of that star sub linebacker position that TCU hadn't recruited really ever because it hadn't been a part of previous defensive schemes. And so they haven't been able to kind of mix and match the pieces in order to find the success that they were hoping for on that side of the ball. And it's led to a really porous run defense and to the degree that teams really haven't had to test the passing defense all that much. But when they have, they've had success through the air too. If you look at what UCF did, especially in the second half against TCU and that loss in Fort Worth, you look at the success that Kansas was able to have early and what ended up being a TCU win. And then, of course, what Houston and SMU did. I mean, so much of their success was based on being able to run the football in big chunks. I've lost track of how many times opposing teams have been able to convert on 3rd and long. And I'm not talking like 3rd and 5, I'm talking 3rd and 9, 3rd and 14 in order to extend drives. And they're not doing it with creativity. They're doing it by literally like running off tackle. And that is such a backbreaker for a team morale and as far as obviously keeping the defense on the field.
So with that, Coach Sonny Dykes, he's obviously had a great deal of success there, at least initially, getting that team to the national championship game. Do you feel like his coaching seat is starting to get warmer? Is there, is the criticism getting loud to the point where, you're starting to wonder about his future with the program?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that Jamie Plunkett and I discussed on our last podcast episode. If you guys want to listen, Frogs Insider or Dave Campbell's Texas Football plug, check box done, good. But coming into the season, I think that you felt like any chance of Sonny Dykes' seat getting warm was probably less than 10%. Like it would have taken a massive scandal or something really terrible. But when you look at the way that they lost to SMU, him getting tossed out of the game in the second half, the way that they lost to Houston at home, those start to become almost inexcusable losses, especially when you think about and Utah fans probably have the same feeling when you think about your precarious position in the future of college football and
Yeah.
wanting to earn and keep a seat at the table. And Utah and TCU are perfect examples of programs that had to fight their way to get a seat at the table, and then only to find that everybody got up from the table and went to a different one. And if you want to make sure that you're a part of it, like, I don't know that you can win your way into whatever the next iteration of power conferences is. But if you're going to do so, you cannot put together back-to-back bowlless seasons. And it's not, Sonny Dykes ability to be candid about not understanding why his team is performing this way and why they've had a lack of success is refreshing if you're a journalist or a reporter, someone covering the team.
Mhm.
But it starts to get really frustrating now when you've heard it over the course of a season and a half, and he doesn't know why other teams are more prepared to play. He doesn't know why his team isn't as excited as others. And you start to say, well, is that a culture issue? And if that's a culture issue, that starts at the top. And is he able to turn things around? I'm not ready to fire him at this point by
Mhm.
any stretch of the imagination. I'm really glad it's not my decision to make. But you need to see some progress coming off of the bye week in the second half of the season, not just with wins and losses, but the culture around this program and the way that this team is galvanizing itself. It's going to be really fascinating to watch with a much tougher second half schedule than first half, how Sonny Dykes is able to showcase the type of coach he can be, the type of program he can run, and if he can do so in a way that prevents him from potentially having to have a tough conversation with athletic director Jeremiah Donati at the end of the season.
So Utah and TCU kind of in similar situations. Utah was coming off the bye last week going into the Arizona game. They obviously went into their bye coming off of a disappointing loss to Arizona. TCU similarly coming off a loss to Houston, a disappointing loss considering the fact of, how Houston has looked this season, certainly disappointing. Do you feel like Sonny Dykes and this Horned Frogs team, do you feel like they've been able to turn the page on that loss to Houston this week in their preparation?
I mean, that's gonna be the question, right?
Yeah.
It's become kind of a joke on the TCU burner accounts on social media of like, how good of a practice did TCU football have leading up to this week's game? I bet it was really good because that like that's the thing is this team looks like it's preparing properly. They're doing all of the right things in
Mhm.
practice. They're showing their attitudes. The players are saying the right things. There was a very clear and obvious culture issue a season ago on that 5-7 run. It doesn't seem like that's the same issue this season. So I do expect this team to come out and play hard. I don't expect them to be flat, but also like I would have said there was absolutely no way they were going to come out flat against Houston. And
Right.
they did. So there are some great leaders. There are some strong personalities. I think Josh Hoover is an excellent leader. Johnny Hodges is an excellent leader. There are guys that will keep this team on track, but they haven't consistently been able to string together wins this season. I mean, the only time that they won 2 games in a row was Stanford and LIU, and LIU doesn't count. No offense to the Sharks of Long Island, but how many people knew Long Island had a university, let alone a football program? Not many. So that one unfortunately doesn't count. But this is put up or shut up time.
Sure.
And I hate to like say must win game 7 in the season. And I don't expect TCU to win at Utah on Saturday night, but it feels like you at least have to show up and be competitive game, or you are potentially going to be on a track for a 4 or 5 win season, which would be devastating for this football program in the state that it is right now.
That's interesting, especially considering where Utah is at and kind of similar, failing to meet expectations to this point of the season. They're certainly kind of in that same sort of situation where it's, we're talking about game 7 being a must win for Utah. So, the battle of must wins
Yeah.
in this one for Utah and TCU. So you brought up Josh Hoover, and he leads the conference in passing yards per game. And watching him, he's got talent. He can make throws. He can make good decisions. What's been the biggest bright spot in the passing game, and where have they sort of struggled in the passing game?
I mean, the biggest bright spot to me is unquestionably Jack Besh. If
Yeah.
people aren't familiar with Jack, he is an LSU transfer. He was, I think, a freshman All-American. He was a leading receiver as a tight end at LSU his freshman season, transferred to TCU, and has been dealing with injuries for the last couple of seasons. He is healthy this year, and he is such a matchup nightmare for opponents.
Yeah.
At 6'2" with deceptive speed. Do we always have to say deceptive speed when it's like a white wide receiver? I feel like we do.
Yeah.
Lunch
Just
pail guy, grinder,
Yep.
hard hat, Wes Welker.
Yep.
But he really does hit all the cliches. He's deceptively fast and he runs exceptional routes, and he's a guy that Josh Hoover really trusts. He is absolutely the I'm just going to throw it up. Jack is probably back there
Yeah.
somewhere, kind of receiver for a guy who definitely has some gunslinger in him. And so he's a blast to watch. He's one of my favorite players on the team. He's one of my favorite people I've covered at TCU. And he's on pace to be the leading receiver in this conference, which is kind of insane to say when you look at how unsuccessful TCU has been overall this year. Negatives, challenges, as I would say to my students, are the turnovers. And I've talked about this with a couple other people this week, but at the end of the day, like, I don't know how much blame to put on Josh Hoover for his decision making, and how much blame to put on all of the other forces around him for his string, like especially the last 3 games, the amount of turnovers that he's thrown. Some of them have been just bad reads and bad decisions. Some of them have been receivers not being on the same page, and some of them have been, this is a kid who desperately wants to win and is willing to take chances if he thinks there's a chance of success out there as well. And so he's absolutely pressing. The offensive line has not provided much. And I mean, they've been better in pass protection than I thought they would be, but they haven't been good enough to develop a consistent pocket, give him time to get through his reads. The wide receivers we thought would be the best part of this team, and in some ways they have been, but it also feels like they've dropped balls in key situations or have been on running the wrong route, or that you haven't been on the same page with Josh in key situations. And so I think the lack of consistency would probably be how I would phrase that, with turnovers being the easiest thing to point to in that regard, and that lack of consistency.
You brought up the offensive line, and, comparing the last 2 iterations of TCU football compared to that 2022 season, I feel like the biggest difference, as much as you want to talk about Max Duggan and Quentin Johnston and the skill players around, I feel like the offensive line was really the biggest difference. You had a couple guys, I think, drafted from that unit. Stephen Avila, with the Los Angeles Rams, was a force to be reckoned with along that line. Has that been kind of I don't want to say the biggest disappointment, but has that been kind of where they've felt the biggest sort of drop off from where they were 2 years ago to now? It just feels like that offensive line is not playing up to the same level.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it for you. It's been the biggest disappointment on the offensive side of the ball.
Okay.
Potentially, I mean, if the run defense wasn't so bad, I'd say the biggest disappointment overall. And this is, and when I talk to people about like can Colorado be successful? Like in the preseason, we talked about it. It was always like, it is really hard to build a team, especially in a chemistry unit, through the transfer portal.
Yeah.
Well, look at TCU's starting offensive line. There is one dude that started his career at TCU that is getting significant snaps. The rest of them are transfers, and most of them are transfers that left for a reason. Bless Harris and Brockemeyer. I always can never remember if it's James or Tommy. It's James. James Brockemeyer are 2 guys that played at high-level Power 5 programs, but came to TCU because of injury issues, did not allow them to have the level of success. They're both highly touted guys, big time recruits, but they're at TCU now for a reason. Colton Deary has probably been TCU's best player. He's probably the most like offensive line guy that is on this team, as far as like, he will bite your head off. He will take your heart out, step on it, and eat it in front of you. And like, while you clean that, like, he is just nasty. And I wish that he had a bigger role. And that is the dude I want leading that offensive line. But he's also, he's not the senior. He's not the old guy. Mike Nichols has been fine for the most part, but he's only born and bred dude on this team. Carson Bruno has been okay. I mean, they have not played like a unit, and this is where, like, again, I don't claim to be an expert in offensive line play. I've played football, but it was flag football. You don't have an offensive line in that. But the one thing I know is that if you're rotating guys on the offensive line, that's a problem. And Phoenix has consistently been playing 7 guys on the O-line, and not because of injury. And what that tells me is you don't have 5 guys you trust. And the results have borne out on that. And I'm sure you're going to want to talk about the run offense here, so I don't want to like steal your thunder. But
no, go ahead.
Like I said, the pass protection has been fine. The run blocking has been abhorrent. And again, you're looking at Cam Cook as a redshirt freshman or sophomore. I can't remember what his designation is. Who didn't really get a lot of snaps, doesn't have a ton of experience. Jeremy Payne is a true freshman who's been really, really good. But again, these are guys without a lot of experience. And then for whatever reason, Kendall Briles keeps trying to make Dominic Richardson happen. Not Dominic Richardson. I can't even remember these guys' names, Dominique Johnson, happen. And it's just because of their association, I think, at Arkansas previously, because you have your OC and your running backs coach both came from Arkansas. And so they're familiar with him. But he has not gotten the job done. That's your experience. And I don't know what happened to Trey Sanders. Trey Sanders looked excellent in camp, and we have not seen barely anything from him so far this season. So all that to say, there's a lot of inexperience in that backfield, and that is part of the problem. But also, like, I know enough to know when there's no hole to hit, it's not the running back's fault that he didn't hit the hole. And there have been running lanes have been very hard to come by for this offense. It leads to bouncing things to the outside. It leads to Kendall Briles giving up on the running game really, really early in situations. It leads to, they keep, I think it's CFB on Fox keeps posting this graphic of like how many teams have fewer yards than the running back Genty at Boise State, and like on that list. And I'm like, go ahead and just like permanently put us in the middle. TCU is not going to pass Ashton Denty's running totals. Like, it's not going to happen. We could play like another like half of a season and we're probably still not going to get there. So like, I just am ready to like permanently stamp it on that list. It has been incredibly disappointing, especially for a program that's had so many exceptional running backs come through, just to see the inability to generate a run offense with any consistency that would take the heat off of Josh Hoover, that would take some of the heat off of the defense that has to be on the field so often, and that would ultimately probably make this a more efficient football team. They just can't get it started.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I was certainly going to ask about the rotation of the offensive line, so I'm glad you hit on it, because that is kind of
it's weird.
Yeah, I was going to say unique, but weird works too. So let's flip it over to the other side, the defense side of the ball. Obviously, you've talked about it. You've hinted at it. Rushing defense is not great. I think they are second to last in the Big 12 in terms of yards allowed per game on the ground at 180 yards. Limiting opposing passing attacks to 155 yards. How much of that is the balance of,
please tell me on how many attempts?
To run the ball.
I would like, is it 15 attempts? Because that's probably what it is. This is not a good pass defense. This is a pass defense that, like I said earlier, has not been tested, because why would you? And I mean, that's why, like, when we did our preview for my show yesterday, as I said, like, I think, like, again, like, I don't want this to sound as a slight to Cam Rising. I'm devastated for him as a college football fan and somebody who respects him and his ability. But the best thing that could have happened was Utah knowing that Cam Rising wasn't going to play, because all Kyle Whittingham is going to do is be like, hey, let's just run our really, really talented Mekhi Bernard running back 57 times and not put any
which
pressure
they probably will.
on. Yeah, which is what and what I would do, and like take the pressure off of Isaac Wilson, your true freshman quarterback, and let Bernard run for 170 yards. Like, that is not off of the table in the ability. And it's at all levels. The tackling last year was so bad and such an issue, and it looked like it had been cleaned up a little bit, but as the season has worn on, that's kind of reared its ugly head once again. They're not getting good push into the backfield along the trenches. The linebackers, which is such a talented group, I don't understand why they haven't been successful. There's like I said, the ability to convert on 3rd and long on the ground has been something that has consistently jumped up to bite TCU in the rear end and extend drives. And running quarterbacks, any type of mobile quarterback, like KJ Jefferson had a big game. Houston, like, threw both of their quarterbacks out there. They had big games. SMU, Rhett Lashley went to KJ Jennings to start instead of Preston Stone, specifically because he was a dual threat leading up to the TCU game. And he had an absolute field day on the ground. And when you have no ability and no confidence to slow down a mobile quarterback, it really does open up lanes for the running game as well. And then, when you might only attempt 12 passes, but you're probably going to complete 7 or 8 of them at 20 plus yards a clip, because they have to focus so much on the running game. It opens things up over the top. TCU's, like, I will say the corners, like the 2 guys that were probably expected to start both got hurt in fall camp. And so that is an issue. And certainly a reason to talk about the deficiencies. But again, TCU's not losing games because of opponents' passing attacks. They're losing games because opponents don't have to pass. And, they made Jalen Daniels look really bad at Arrowhead Stadium a couple of weeks ago, but also, like, unfortunately, Jalen Daniels has just been really bad this season. They made KJ Jefferson look really good, and we've seen what's happened to UCF since then. So I think Isaac Wilson can be successful. I think he probably has fewer than 20 pass attempts in this game. And I think that he, as long as he doesn't throw 3 interceptions, which is still a possibility, that he can be efficient enough for Utah to be able to stay on the field on the offensive side of the ball, wear down that TCU defense. And what we've seen is when that happens in the second half, they aren't tackling as well, and they don't look like they want to.
All right, so we've hit on the offense, hit on the defense, and just let's talk about the game and the fan base. Do you feel like TCU is going to have, a good contingency of Horned Frog fans? What are you expecting from the atmosphere and just from the game in general?
So this was like the travel game for the TCU
Oh,
travel association.
yeah, yeah, cool.
So that's
Ah,
awesome. I think some of the shine has worn off of that trip for people. I'll be interested. I think, because of the history between these two programs,
yeah,
and it's such a great rivalry and so many fun games. I think that there will be a good contingent. And there's so many Horned Frogs on the West Coast. I always tell people I'm the one that started the trend, is one of like the first Californians to attend TCU. But there's so many of us out there now that I
yeah.
do expect there to be a decent contingent. But I will also say this isn't a cheap trip. This isn't a drivable trip. This isn't a
No,
$59 on Southwest to get to Kansas City. So I
right.
think that if TCU was maybe 4-2 or 5-1 or something like that, we'd probably see a really strong contingent. As I still think that there will be several thousand fans there, but not enough to necessarily make an impact on the game unless they're able, unless TCU comes out just absolutely on fire, puts a couple touchdowns on the board and quiets the Utah crowd. Not going to hold my breath for that, but it is certainly a possibility. It's college football; anything can happen. But I think that, like I told you, I'm going to this game. It's my first time at
Yeah,
Rice Eccles. I would be so excited for a night game at Rice Eccles if TCU wasn't playing in it. But just I think it's going to be, awesome. It's going to be freezing cold. I don't know how I feel about
yes,
that. But overall, it is one of the great atmospheres in college sports. A night game at Rice Eccles is it's not like Death Valley or anything, but it's still something that college football fans know and appreciate. And so I think
yeah.
it'll be a lot of fun up until kickoff. And at that point, I don't know how quickly tears freeze, but I'm gonna get some of those hand warmer things.
Yes,
Many
get a
jackets
couple
and
of those.
sweaters, yeah, and we'll just like the Andy Reid from the playoff game where his mustache is
Frozen
frozen and the
mustache.
snot. Yeah,
Yep,
I don't have a mustache.
yep.
We're good there, but I'm glad I'll be behind the camera, not in front of it. I'll put it that way.
Awesome. Melissa, you've been great. This has been awesome. Where can people find your stuff and where can they just read up on the Horned Frogs?
Yeah, if you want to follow my ramblings on Twitter or X or whatever you choose to call it, you can follow me at the Coach Melissa on Instagram at Melissa Trieb, and then our Frogs Insider podcast, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. We're posting, 2 episodes a week. We cover not just football, especially this season and last season and many seasons, but all of the sports. TCU women had a really tough volleyball match out in Salt Lake City a week ago,
Yep.
that the Utes took from them. But then they bounced back and beat BYU. So we're all friends here on that regard.
Go Horned Frogs.
Yes, go Horned Frogs. But yeah, we're covering all the great sports, and with basketball coming up, we'll be ramping up coverage in that too. So give us a listen, give us a watch. Try to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and when we do, Jamie and I get to pick punishments for each other in celebration. So if you want to
Ooh,
subscribe, even just to get us to that 1,000 subscribers, and then unsubscribe, totally fine. Our deadline is Halloween, so we've got some time to make each other miserable.
awesome. Melissa, this has been great. Thank you so much. Looking forward to having you up there at Rice Eccles Stadium on Saturday night. Should be a fun one.
Should be a game. Should be a football
Yep.
game.
Should be a football game. For myself, Steve Bartle, for Melissa, this is the Utah Blockcast signing off.